Hello and welcome to Hexed Encountered. My name's Joe. Today we will be looking at the game South Pacific. This is a Second World War at Sea game from Avalanche Press. And we're going to be specifically looking at the battle scenarios and how those are played out. Now this would also be similar to the way in which you would play a fight that occurs from a contact on the operational level of the game, which was something I discussed in a previous video. I will post a link here on the card at the top right of the screen so that you can click over to that if you would like to see the operational level. Because in that operational level, when two task forces enter the same box, I say box because they are literally boxes, not hexes on the operational map, but when the two enter into the same box, they have contact, and you then would come to this map or the more generic version of this map. This tactical map that we see right here before us, this is a special one specifically for the South Pacific game that shows Iron Bottom Sound. So I don't actually have the entire map in this particular shot. There's a little bit to the south that you guys can't see, including the label that says Iron Bottom Sound. The cartography for this map was done by Tiffany Monroe. And as I mentioned, this was done specifically for this particular game. So this is the fighting around Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands in 1942. And this first scenario, or this scenario we will be taking a look at here, is actually the first battle scenario. Here we see the scenario book. We're doing Battle Scenario 1, Savro Island, on August 9th, 1942. And the setup description reads, Vice Admiral Gunichi Makawa had just taken command of Japanese 8th Fleet based at Rabaul, mostly older ships assigned to what was seen as a backwater. As soon as reconnaissance confirmed American landings on Guadalcanal and Tulagi, Makawa gathered as many of his ships as could be made ready and headed down New Georgia Sound, what Americans would come to call the Slot, to conduct a night attack. Does note the scenario uses the Iron Bottom Sound tactical map. Our time frame is night. Our starting weather condition is cloudy. The Japanese forces who set up in hex 0202 and 0102 and are approaching or facing southeast are the cruiser or the heavy cruisers Kako, Furutaka, Kinugasa, Aoba, and Chokai, the light cruiser Teneryu, and Yubari, and the destroyer Unagi. Now the Allied forces, there's actually more Allied forces in this than Japanese forces, but the Japanese will have the benefit of surprise. So our Allied forces include the DD-390, USS Ralph Talbot, DD-387, USS Blue, the cruisers Astoria, Quincy, Vincennes, the destroyers Helm and Wilson, the cruisers Chicago, and the Royal Australian Navy cruiser Canberra, the destroyers Bagley and Patterson, the light cruiser San Juan, and the Royal Navy ship Hobart, also a light cruiser, destroyers Monson and Buchanan. And then we have 8 large transports up near Tulagi, 8 large transports down near Guadalcanal, and the heavy Royal Australian Navy cruiser Australia, which is escorting 7 large transports also near Guadalcanal. Now, special rules, it says you are to place the ships as shown. There are hexes listed in here that obviously go with the map. The Axis player has initiative until an Axis ship is spotted or opens fire, and then we would roll for initiative on subsequent rounds. Allied complacency. No Allied ship may move or fire until a ship in its hex has spotted or been fired on, either guns or torpedoes, by an enemy ship. In the first exchange of fire between the Axis and Allied ships, the Axis player resolves both gunnery and torpedo fire, and any damage is marked off before the Allied player resolves gunnery and torpedo combat. After this first exchange, for the remainder of the game, Allied groups roll 1 die when first fired upon. On a result of 1 through 3, the Axis player resolves gunnery and torpedo fire, and the damage is marked off before the Allies return fire. On a result of 4 through 6, their fire is simultaneous. So typically in these tactical battles, all fire is simultaneous and is resolved. In this one, because the Allied forces had no idea that the Japanese were in the slot coming down through Iron Bottom Sound, and they were just conducting their landings, and so they were caught flat-footed essentially. And there's more to it than that. I'm kind of generalizing a little bit, but essentially these rules will accommodate the fact that the Japanese had, surprise on their side and some tactical advantage when it came to this first night action in Iron Bottom Sound. Speaking of night action, night vision rule: Axis ships may spot enemy ships up to 3 hexes away, but Allied ships may spot enemy ships up to 1 hex away or up to 3 away if the ships are firing their gun. Starlight, Star Bright: at the start of each round, the Axis player may select 1 hex and roll 1 die. On a result of 5 or 6, a float plane has successfully dropped a flare in that hex. Any ship within day visibility range may sight ships in that hex or any adjacent hexes regardless of night visibility conditions. Ships in a direct line between the illuminated hex and the firing ship may also be spotted. They are silhouetted by the flare. Our first rodeo rule: the Allied ships may not use radar. Strange ships entering harbor: Allied transport groups may not move until an Axis ship has been spotted within 6 hexes of their position. Narrow channels: ships may depart the tactical map through Lengo or Sea Lark Channel. Those are in the southeastern part of the map. Ships that enter those 2 hexes, 2314 for Lengo, 2312 for Sea Lark, must roll for grounding per rule 9.53. I'll talk about that if and when that comes up. Only 1 group of ships at a time may occupy a channel hex. You can disregard grounded ships. Ships that depart the map in this way are not counted as sunk for victory point purposes, but any damage they have suffered does count. Game length: the game ends when 12 rounds, 264 impulses have been played, or all ships of one side have been sunk and or left the board, whichever comes first. Victory conditions: the Axis player receives 10 victory points for each transport sunk. The Axis player wins at the end of play if he or she has scored 100 more victory points than the Allied player. Any other result is an Allied victory. The Japanese squadron ravaged, this is the true aftermath. The Japanese squadron ravaged the Allied patrol forces, sinking 4 heavy cruisers and badly damaging a 5th. Rather than press on to destroy the American transports, Mikawa turned back for his base at Rabaul to get his cruisers out of the range of American carrier planes by dawn. Unknown to Mikawa, the American carriers had already fled themselves, leaving the transport fleet at his mercy. So this was a failed opportunity on the part of the Japanese, but that is the setup. There are actually 3 scenarios around this night action, with some variations in the commander's mindsets and behavior, both on the Japanese side and on the Allied side. But we're just going to play this first one, which is kind of the historical one. All right, so here's a look at pretty much the entirety of the battleground area. So this isn't the entirety of the actual map. It does extend a little bit further to the bottom here, underneath where it says Guadalcanal right here. There's the bottom of the map that says Iron Bottom Sound, etc. Henderson Field is right here, which is kind of off map, of course. As we just saw in the scenario setup, it lists the hexes that the ships are to start in, as well as a compass point, which indicates their direction. That's actually for the advanced combat rules, which I'm not going to show because that's a little bit more obviously advanced, and I just want to kind of go through the sequence of this and how it works. And because it's 264 impulses, it's doubtful I'll go through the entire scenario, but we'll go through some of it. There aren't really turns. You kind of go through entire sequence of 22 impulses, and then you start over if the battle has not ended, basically, is the way it works. So before we get into that, all the sequences and stuff, we have our Japanese ships up here. So I did split them into 2 groups. So anyway, we have the destroyer USS Blue here. We have another destroyer USS Ralph Talbot up here. We have some cruisers here, light cruisers here. We have the single Royal Australian Navy cruiser down here. And I kind of faced them in the way that they should be facing, basically, mostly. Like these guys should technically be facing that way, because they should be facing north, etc. It really doesn't matter because I'm not going to use the advanced rules, as I said. So let's talk impulse sequence. So there are 22 of them. So the first one is determine which player has initiative. We know the Axis forces, the Japanese, they have the initiative. The non-initiative player can move all of his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 2. So here's where ship speed becomes important. Now, I did kind of cobble together. We have a ship data book, which has a ton of ships in it. Basically, all the counters that are in the game, all the ship counters that are in the game, they're in this book. I basically scanned them in and made sheets for myself to use during the game. So here we have the Australian ships, then we have all the American ships that actually spills over onto this second page down here, and then these are the Japanese ships. But here you can see speed, and we have the speed of each ship. So a lot of them are 3s. We have some 4s down here. The 3 pluses, that's on the operational map. A plus sign indicates like a 3.5. It's like an and a half. So on odd number turns, this would be a 3. On even number turns, it'd be a 4. That's not in the tactical game. It's just a 3. So we keep it simple. So basically, our slowest ships are all 3s. Our fastest ships are, well, that's not true. I'm neglecting to mention the transports, but our warships are all 3s or 4s on both sides. The Japanese ships are all 3. The American destroyers are mostly 4s. We have a couple 3s here. The transports, however, are only 1. Now, luckily for the transports, they're located here off the coast of Tulagi, and I think this got bumped, and it should actually be in 2206, which is right here. And then we have the 2 down here in 1813 and 1914. So 1 here and 1 here. And they don't move anyway until a Japanese ship is within 6 hexes and is sighted. And the Japanese, as you can probably tell, are all the way up here in the corner. Okay, so here on our ship sheets, you'll also note these boxes. So we don't have any battleships in this, so nobody has any primary guns. So we have secondary guns, tertiary guns, and then some of the ships will have torpedoes. They'll also have anti-aircraft, but there are no aircraft in this scenario, so we don't have to really worry about this except for damage. Then you have hull and fuel. Okay, we don't really need to worry about this all that much either. It's mostly this stuff, and especially hull, because if all your hull gets damaged, you sink. So boxes that are empty like this can be damaged by any fire, whether it's primary, secondary, or tertiary. So the weapons, the guns, for some of these, the Australian cruisers, for example, they can be hit by even tertiary guns and take damage. The ones that are kind of hashed like this, these can only be damaged by secondary or primary guns. And then same thing with the hull. And there's actually a fully blocked off, which we don't have in this scenario, but those can only be hit by primary guns. They can only take damage from primary guns or torpedoes, because torpedoes have a lot of power. Now, speaking of torpedoes, you'll see the Japanese here have 3LL. That's the infamous or famous, depending on your viewpoint, long lance torpedo. Those have a longer range than American torpedoes, and they also have reloads. So the way the reloads work, and normally they would get reloaded faster, but time is slowed down in battle scenarios that take place on this Iron Bottom sound map. So there's 6 impulses between firing your long lance and then the Japanese reloading it and being able to fire it again. So basically I'll slash it, and then after they fire it first, I'll slash it, and then once they fire it again, I'll just exit off. But we'll use this to track damage on the ships. Okay, now looking at the ship markers, and let's look at the Chicago for example here. So here is the USS Chicago. 061, 0 primary factors, 6 secondary factors, 1 tertiary factor. So when they fire, we'll roll 6 dice when they're firing their secondary weaponry and 1 die when they're firing tertiary. The airplane means they have a float plane. The 1 here in the red target circle is its anti-aircraft factors, and then the 3 is its speed. Now, some of them you'll see other symbols on. The Canberra here, for example. Beside its anti-air factor, it's got this green too. That's its torpedo factor. So it carries torpedoes, as do the destroyers. You can see up here Ralph Talbot. It's got a 4 in a green box. That indicates that it is for torpedoes. So we're ready to start. So as I just said, so the first impulse is initiative, which we already know. The second impulse is the non-initiative player, so that would be the Americans, moves all his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 2. However, we know that the Americans, or the Allies rather, cannot move until they have spotted an Axis ship. So we're going to skip Impulse 2. Impulse 3, initiative player moves all his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 2. Our Japanese ships here are all 3, so they get to move. So we'll have them both move up. We'll move them there, and they move 1 box. Okay, and then we'll move this one here. Actually, we'll go here to try and kind of spread them out a little bit. Both players conduct gunnery combat. Axis ships may spot enemy ships up to 3 hexes away. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this stack can fire at the blue. So let's see, let's do it and see what we got. So we have the Kako, and you have to announce what your target is. Now, obviously the target for all of the Japanese is going to be the blue because that's the only ship in the hex. If they were taking on one of these groups down here with multiple ships, they'd have to say what ship they're firing at. And you could have all your ships fire at one ship. You can spread it out. You can even split primary, secondary, and tertiary between different targets. You cannot, however, split one of those. So if you had, say, 8 primaries, you could not say, well, I'm going to use 4 on this ship and these other 4 on that ship. No, all 8 at one target. So all your secondaries at one, and then all your tertiaries can also be fired at that same one or a different one, but that's it. That's the only way you can split your fire. This is basically like bucket of dice combat. So I'm going to bring my dice tower in, and I'm going to pull over some dice here. And I'm going to use red for the Japanese, and they have 4. The Kako has 4. So we roll 4 dice, like so. And a 6 is a hit, so they get 1 hit. Okay, so they get 1 hit, and then you roll to find out what that hit is. And you roll 2 dice for that. And then there's a gunnery damage table, and we rolled a 6, and a 6 is tertiary. So we find the blue, which is right here, and it doesn't have any tertiary. So because the blue has no tertiary, it becomes an anti-aircraft hit, and we scratch off the anti-aircraft here for this. So I'm just going to exit out to indicate that their anti-aircraft has been damaged. So they have 2 tertiary, so I'll just use the same 2 dice. Nothing. Now we'll do the 4 for the Furitaka, and they get a hit. So we'll roll 2 dice to see what they've done to the blue, and it's an 8, which is secondary. So we come here to the blue again, and here's secondary, and I'm just going to X off one of these boxes to indicate that that has been destroyed as well. So now when they fire, they won't be able to use that gun because, again, all the damage is applied first. Typically, the fire is all resolved simultaneously. So you roll for one side, and then you don't, any damage that's taken would still not apply until after the other side has fired back. In this scenario, the Japanese get to fire first in the initial impulse, and then after that, or the initial round, I guess, and then after that, the Allies will have to roll a die, and on a 1 to 3, it's the Japanese fire still counts first, and then if it's a 4 to 6, it's simultaneous. So in this case, they're going to lose a secondary gun factor, so they'll only be able to fire 1 gun back at the Japanese. Now let's roll for the Furitaka's secondary, or tertiaries rather, and they miss. Now we get down to the destroyer. Oh, they have a light cruiser. The Tenru, or Tenru, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, I'm sorry. They have one secondary, which misses. And their fourth and final ship is the light cruiser Yubari, which has 2 secondaries. And they also miss. But still, they got a couple hits on the ship there, which is pretty good. Now they can fire back because they've been fired on, and they're within 3 hexes. So they'll just fire at the Kako with their 1 tertiary. And they actually got a hit. They got a 6. That's a hit. So the Kako does have secondary and tertiary. It's actually the first ship listed. So I'm going to roll 2 dice. And we get a 6, and a 6 is tertiary. So the Kako just lost one of its tertiary guns. All right, now I did not use torpedoes. I can, but I did not use torpedoes. So the Japanese ships with long lance torpedo factors may fire on a target at a range of 3 or 4 hexes. Normally it's at a range of 1 or 2 for torpedo fire. But as I said, I don't think that the Japanese, in this case, we're going to go hunting for bigger game than a destroyer. And we're going to save our long lances for when we get down further into the slot and get closer to some of these cruisers. Even though in theory the Japanese don't really know what's out there. I think that, you know, a human player would probably say, I'm going to hold off on using my long lance on this little guy and wait for, you know, something bigger, like, or more important, like a transport, because a transport obviously gets you 10 victory points for sinking it. So the next phase after torpedo would be non-initiative player moves his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 1. Now the blue can actually move because it did get fired on. So it's going to actually try to move away from these guys, and we're going to steam this in this direction. Let's actually turn them this way to try and get away, extend a little bit, because now they're out of range. But now the initiative player moves his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 1. So they'll just move these guys down again and move these guys in as well. Now again, this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, still out of range, but that one is not. So the Kako will fire again. No hits. Now we'll roll our 1 tertiary, and they miss with that as well. Now we'll fire the Furutaka, same thing, 4. No hits. They have 2 secondaries, or tertiaries rather, also no hits. Then we have our 1 secondary, and they get a hit. So the Tenryu hits the blue, so we roll 2. And we get a 4, and a 4 is hull. Now it does say, if plunging fire, add a second hull hit. So what is plunging fire, you may wonder? Okay, plunging fire. Hits by primary guns. So we know it's not a primary gun, so this will not apply. But just in case you're wondering, hits by primary guns at a range of 6 hexes or by bombs from aircraft destroy a second hull box on a result of 10 on the gunnery damage table. Now we rolled a 4, which also shows that. This does not apply to ships with all their hull boxes enclosed by a box. Such ships are protected by heavy deck armor. All right, so we know it doesn't count. The blue is going to lose 1 hull here, and the hull is the important thing, because if you take enough hull damage, you will sink. So the hull for the blue, it's only 2, and now it's only 1. So we still have 1 more ship to roll. And that ship is the Yubari, which actually has 2. So we'll roll 2 dice, and they get another hit. Now we'll roll to see what that hit is. And it's another 4, and guess what? That's a hull hit. We already know that that's a hull hit. We don't even need to look it up, which means the blue has been sunk. I'm just going to run a line through it like that. And we take the counter, and it has been sunk. So goodbye to the blue. And that now moves us further down here. We are now in impulse number 9. So we are now in impulse number 9, which is torpedo combat. And again, we're not going to use our torpedo. They actually don't have any sightings. Now, I didn't at the top of this round do the float plane, so we'll do that when we get to the second round. But for now, we're just gonna hang tight here. So now we're back to the non-initiative player moving his or her groups with a speed of 4 or 2. Now, the Americans do have some destroyers that have a speed of 4. However, we're back to that thing where they can't move unless they've spotted the enemy, and they have not spotted any enemy, so they cannot move. Which moves us on to number 11, which is the initiative player. Same thing, 4 or 2. All the Japanese ships are 3, so nobody moves there either. Now we would do gunnery combat and torpedo combat. Neither of those are possible. The Japanese do not have any sighting of any other ships. These guys are all out of range. So now we end up at phase, or rather impulse 14, non-initiative player. Again, 4, 3, or 1, no, because they haven't spotted anybody. 15 is the initiative player, 4, 3, or 1. So that is a yes. We're going to move our guys, we'll go this way with a thought of going around Savro Island to the north, and we'll send these guys this way to go around Savro Island to the south. So we're going to pretend that we don't know Ralph Talbot is here, but if we were playing this game, again, we would know that the Ralph Talbot is there because we can see it on the map. So we are on to Impulse 16, which is gunnery combat. Again, not possible. Torpedo combat, also not possible. 18, non-initiative player moves his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 2. Again, they can't move. Nobody is spotted. Initiative player moves his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 2, so they can move, and they will. They'll go here. They're still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 away from the Talbot. These guys will move here. Then we do gunnery and torpedo again, and now we have emergency repairs. So emergency repairs, if you end up being dead in the water because you have propulsion problems, the last impulse of each round of combat, and once during each special operations phase for ships with the abort missions. So that's on the operations map, not this one. The owning player rolls 1 die for each ship unable to move. On a result of 6, the ship may move at speed 1. On a result of 1 or 2, the damage is so great that repair is not possible and you cannot make further attempts. The damaged ship, still capable of movement, may not be repaired because a repair can never move your speed above 1. So we don't have any of that right now. We had one ship that was damaged and it was actually sunk, so we no longer need to worry about that. So I'm going to move my dice off to the side so they're a little bit like not on the map here. And I think I moved that. No, he's in the right spot, 2206. Okay, so that actually ends the first round here. And we go on to the second round. So we start over again at the first sequence. So since they fired and were spotted by the blue, we can now roll for initiative. Okay, so we're going to roll 1 die. I'm rolling blue for the Americans. 1 through 3 is Japanese. 4 through 6 is American or allies. And so the allies, or the Americans if you would prefer, win initiative. So they have initiative, which means they're the initiative player. So the non-initiative player in Impulse 2 moves all of his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 2. They get to move. They will move here. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're closing in on the Talbot. The Kinugasa will continue to lead her group to the south, the southeast, instead of straight east like the Kako is. So now we go to the combat phase. There aren't any. Yeah, because the initiative player still can't move. So we went through 2 when they moved. Then 3 would have been the Americans or the Allies move, and they did not because they can't. 4 and 5 is gunnery and torpedo combat. We go back to non-initiative, moving with 4, 3, or 1. And so now we can move here. And again, I forgot to do the special night vision or starlight, star bright. So let's do that right now. Let's roll. You're supposed to do it at the beginning. It went out of the, let me just do it again. It's a 2. So it was not successful. You need a 5 or a 6, so it doesn't matter. But they are now inside of that, and these guys will move one more this way. And then I think we'll move, well, maybe we'll continue one more hex here and then go down and around this way. So that's the plan. All right, so now they've seen the Talbot because it's within 3 hexes. So now we get some combat. So we are in phase, or impulse rather, 8. So the Kako will fire at the Ralph Talbot and gets 2 hits. 2 hits. So that's not good. So let's roll 2 dice first for the first hit. We get an 8, which is secondary. So we look at the Talbot, which is here. Secondary, it loses one of its factors. Right, and now we roll the other one. And we get a 7, and a 7 is primary, which it doesn't have, but that gets bumped down to secondary. So now it has lost both of its guns. So that's bad. Now we'll go through, well, let me see here. Yep, we have to roll to see if they get to, so they rolled a 5. The Americans, trust me, it was a 5. It kind of flipped over there, but it was a 5. So on a 5 or 4 to 6, their fire is simultaneous, so they will get to fire back even if they get sunk with their 2 tertiaries, which aren't exactly heavy firepower, but they will get to fire back. Now the Kako, if I remember correctly, yes, it took 1 tertiary damage, so we'll roll 1 die, and look at that, they get another hit. And they get a 9, and a 9 is a primary. So the way it cascades down, it goes primary to secondary to tertiary. None of those apply to the Ralph Talbot because it doesn't have primary, or it's no primary, secondary is already wiped out, no tertiary, so we go to AA, marked off. And now we go to Furitaka. We'll roll its 4 secondaries. And they get a hit. And they get a 6, and a 6 is tertiary, so that would then cascade down. So according to Rule 7.52, destroyed gunnery, if a ship had primary armament and has lost all its primary guns, an additional hit on a primary becomes a hull hit. Likewise, hits on secondaries become hull hits. Hits on tertiary become anti-aircraft hits after all tertiary armaments destroyed, and become hull hits after all AA guns are destroyed. Once a ship has lost all its guns, all hits on any gun type become hull hits. So this is a hull hit. So things are looking bad for the Talbot here. And so now we move on to the 2 secondary, or tertiaries rather. Nothing there. Then if I remember correctly, our next ship has 1 secondary, and it gets a hit. And we roll, and it is a 5, and a 5 is a secondary, which becomes a hull hit. So the Talbot has been sunk. But it does get to fire back with its 2 secondaries at the Kako, and it gets a hit. And the hit is a 6, which is a tertiary. So the Kako does have 1 tertiary left, so it loses that. So the Kako now has no tertiary armament left, but the Talbot has been sunk. So 2 American destroyers have been sunk. So this would be number 9. Then we go to non-initiative. Player moves his or her group with a speed of 4 or 2, which is none. Then initiative with 4 or 2, which again we can't, because these Americans or allies that are remaining don't have vision on anybody. Both players. Then we do gunnery torpedo. No, that's 12 and 13. 14, they can move again. So they're going to move this way, and these guys are going to move here. That's 14. 15 is the allies move, which they can't. 16, 17, more combat. 18, 4, 3, or 2. So they'll move, and they will move down like that. That's 18, 19 is initiative player, then 20 and 21 are the combats, and 22 is emergency repairs. And we're done with round 2. We go to round 3. The allies always roll for initiative, so they will roll again. And this time it's a 1, which means the Japanese have initiative. So the Americans would get to go first. The Japanese will roll for their flare, and they get a 5, which means they do get to drop a flare from their float plane, and this will give them daylight spotting range. So spotting range, maximum sighting range in clear weather is 6 hexes in daylight. We know the weather is cloudy, so we do have a sighting ranges table right here. And you can see weather day/night. Clear and cloudy is 6 and 3. So if we get daytime visibility in cloudy, it's going to be 6 hexes. Now, here's the thing. So I didn't really explain this at the beginning, but primary guns are the big guns, right? The battleship guns, mostly. And secondary guns are your smaller guns, the cruiser guns, etc. And then obviously the tertiaries are your small 5-inchers or whatever, you know, basically your destroyer guns. So the range for a primary is 6 hexes. The range for a secondary is 4 hexes. And the range for a tertiary is 2 hexes, which means I was screwing it up when I was letting them fire at targets 3 hexes away. So this is why we do these, so that I can make mistakes, and either I or someone who watches the video and is familiar with the game will point them out, and so everybody benefits from it. So in this case, some of that stuff that happened earlier on should not have happened, because tertiary guns and their range is only 2. We're just going to move on, but the point is we're going to drop a flare here on the Astoria. And in this hex we have the Astoria, the Vincennes, the Quincy. Those are all heavy cruisers. Then we have the destroyers Helm and Wilson. Okay, so down here we have another stack with the Chicago. So I could have dropped it here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this one is 6, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Neither one is going to be in range of secondary guns, at least not at the initial part of the turn. We do know the Japanese have initiative, so the Americans would move first. However, they still can't move, even though we've got a flare here. They still can't see out into the distance, obviously, because they're in the location of the flare. So now, if these two were a little closer together, you could have dropped the flare in between, and then it illuminates the hex and the adjacent hexes. So you would have had a 6, you have basically a 6 hex area around the central hex that is illuminated. And anything in between would also be illuminated because it would be silhouetted by the light. Again, regardless, at the current time, it doesn't really matter because they still can't see them. Or they can see them, but they can't fire because they're out of range. And they cannot see them, so they can't move, even though in Impulse 2, the non-initiative player would move all of his or her groups with a speed of 4, 3, or 2. So you may have figured this out on your own, but the way the 22 impulses and the reasoning behind it, I believe, and this is just my conclusion, I haven't actually read anything from Avalanche Press, although I'm sure it's probably come up before, but the reason they do so many impulses and they alternate between obviously the initiative, the non-initiative side and the initiative side, and they use the various speeds. If you count up the moves within a turn, ships with a speed of 4 will get to move 5. With a speed of 3, you get to move 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And as you probably gather, with a speed of 2, you can move 1, 2, 3 times. And with a speed of 1, you get to move twice. So you get to move your movement, or your speed rather, plus 1 in one round of the game. So let's get back to this. So non-initiative player, that is the allies, they can't move because they don't have any visibility. So the initiative now with a 4, 3, or 2 gets to move. So these guys will move 1, and these guys will move 1. Then we have gunnery combat, which nobody's in range. 1, 2, 3, 4. They would be in range if I had used this hex, but I chose to do the Astoria first. So we'll just play that out. So we go to, that would be 2 and 3, 4 and 5 is the combat. Then we go to 6, which the allies still can't move. 7, the initiative player gets to move again. So now we move 1, and 1, 2, 3, 4. So now they're in range. And these guys get to move as well. And 1, 2, 3, they are now in range as well. So now we're going to have some combat. So let me roll first to determine if this will be a simultaneous firing between the Allies and the Japanese, or the Japanese get to go first and everything's applied before the Allied ships fire back. It is a 5, which means the Allied ships get to fire back simultaneously. All fire is simultaneous in this turn. So the Japanese will get to fire first, because that's just how I've been doing it, basically. So we know the Kako here currently has 4. If we look at our status, all 4 secondary guns are good, but both tertiaries have been knocked out. So we're going to roll 4 dice for that. They'll fire at the Astoria right on top. They got 1 hit. Okay, so they have 1 hit. We'll roll for the result of that 1 hit, and we get an 8. And an 8 on our gunnery table is secondary. So they hit the Astoria, and the Astoria is right here. Now, this has hashed boxes. The hashed boxes means a secondary hit can hit it, but not a tertiary. Or a secondary hit can damage it, but not a tertiary. So we're going to fill in or X off one of these to indicate that it has lost 1. But fire is simultaneous, so they will get to fire back with all 6 of their factors. Now, the tertiary's out of range. We know that, and I will play that correctly from now on. For Ritaka will now fire. We'll do 4 for them. They get 1 hit. That's 6. So I thought that was going to spin out to something else. So they also get a hit. They're also firing at the Astoria. They get a 6, and a 6 is tertiary. So the Astoria has 1 tertiary, and that's going to get removed. Okay. And so now we will do the Tenaru, which rolls no hits. Actually, it only has one factor, so that was a mistake on my part. The Yubari has 2, and they get no hits. So that's all the Japanese fire, and now the Allies will fire back. So we'll start with the Astoria. Got my 6 blue dice. Whoops. Ugh, come on. So we get 2 hits. They'll fire at the Kako. Why not, right? All right, now we'll roll to see what that hit was. It's a 6. That 6 is a tertiary, but their tertiaries have already been knocked out. Although they shouldn't have been, to be fair. But I'm going to play it out because they screwed up. I'm just going to play it out. So with the tertiaries knocked out, they knock out the AA. Now they have a second hit to roll for. And that's a 7, and a 7 is primary, which they don't have, so that actually bumps down to a secondary. So 2 hits on the Kako do some damage there, and that was Astoria, so now we'll roll the Vincennes. 4, 5, 6. And look at that. They get 2 hits as well, and they also rolled 3 5s. Wow. Not that the 5s mean anything, but those were high rolls. And they roll a 6, that is a 5 and a 1. 6, again, is tertiary. They're also firing at the Kako. So with the AA already knocked out, that hits the hull. And we'll roll for our second hit. And it's a 12, and a 12 is critical damage. So this is our first exposure to critical damage. So let me explain what critical damage is. So when a gunnery hit results in a critical damage result, roll 2 dice and consult the critical damage table. Hits by tertiary guns do not cause critical damage. Ignore these results. Armor that would normally prevent damage from the gun fired protects against critical damage unless the rules specify otherwise. Well, none of these ships actually can have anything that will prevent damage from secondaries. So we roll a 5, and a 5 on the critical damage is 2 hull, and there's a note for secondary destroys 1 heavy armor hull box, which is not applicable in this case. But the Kako loses 2 hull there. So it's down to just 2 hull left. And now we'll move on to the Quincy, which also has 6. So let's roll these. And they get no hits, so the Quincy strikes out. The American U.S. Navy was hot there for a minute. All right, so now the Helm and the Wilson are destroyers with tertiaries they can't fire. Still not too bad for the Americans there. Now we'll do this stack here. So the Kingaza will fire first. They've got 4. Oh, look at the chock. It's got 7. All right, so we're going to roll 4 here for the Kinugasa. They get no hits. And we're firing at the Chicago since it's on top. The Aoba, sorry. They get no hits. So now we're getting some no damage. We were getting a lot of damage on the early rolls, which seems a little unlikely. I need a 7th die here. I might roll this 3 and 4 because if I roll 7, they don't all fit, as we saw before. So there's none there, and now I'll roll 3 more. And they get 1 hit. So the Chokai gets 1 hit on the Chicago. So let's roll for what that hit does. It is a 3, and a 3 is torpedo mount. The Chicago does not have a torpedo mount. So if a ship with no torpedo mount receives a torpedo mount hit, the hit is ignored. So that is a break for the Chicago. So now we'll check what's under the choke. Okay, so we got destroyer, and they are out of range. All right, so now the Chicago will attack the Kinugasa here. It has 6 guns. And let me roll this 3. They got 1 hit so far. 1 hit. 1 hit on the Kinugasa. And we get a 6. And a 6 is tertiary. So let's look at the Kinugasa here. So it has 2 tertiaries, so it's going to take 1 off the board. Now the Canberra will fire. It has 5. It gets no hits. And then we have 2 destroyers, Bagley and Patterson. Neither one of those have secondaries. They are therefore out of range. And that concludes that combat round. So not a ton of damage done in that little dust up. And we move on. So we are now in number 10. Non-initiative moves with a 4 or 2. So that's no. 11 also no, because they don't have any 4s. Then we would do gunnery combat again. So nobody moved, but we can still do gunnery combat. So we'll do the same thing. Kako will fire at Astoria with 4. Right? I'm sorry, with 3. They had 1 knocked out. They get 2 5s, but no 6s. So the Kako is done. Furutaka gets 2 hits. It's a big roll for them. And these dice like to spin. That's a 4. 4 is hull and the plunging fire, which we know is not applicable. So that's a hull hit on the Astoria. So we'll mark that off. The Astoria takes a hull hit. Now we move on to Teneru, or Teneru. I'm sure I'm butchering that. And, oh wait, they only have 1. That's easy enough. They rolled a 4. That's a miss. And Yubari has 2. They get a hit. So let's see what it does to the Astoria. 8. And 8 is secondary. So they lose a secondary. Okay, so they're down to 4 now, the Astoria. And that ends that as well. So now we'll roll for the Astoria with only 4. because they've had 2 guns knocked out. Actually, no, they get 5 because this is simultaneous. And they get nothing. And Vincennes, nothing. Quincy, nothing. Wow, striking out all over the place now. And then our 2 destroyers, of course, can't do anything, so that was not great. Now we'll switch back over to the Japanese down here. The Kinugasa will roll 4. Tertiary. They got nothing. Then the Aoba with 4, and then the Chokai with 7. So Aoba, we're all still firing at the Chicago. Nothing. Now I'll roll 4 for the Chotai. Is it Chotai or yeah, Chokai, sorry. They got 1 hit on their first 4. Now I'll roll the other 3. And they get a second hit. So 2 hits to the Chicago here. Now let's see what we get on the first hit. The first hit is a 9. A 9 is primary, so the Chicago is going to take a hit to the primary, which becomes secondary. And now we'll roll the second hit. That's an 8. An 8 is secondary, so they lose a secondary. They do get all of their 6 to start, though, here, which they start rolling right now. They get 1 hit on the Kinugasa. And that hit is on the tertiary. So Kinugasa loses its second tertiary. Now we'll roll the Canberra, which only has 5, if I remember correctly. And they get 1 hit as well. Now you can spread these out. I'm just kind of like keeping it rolling on 1 ship only because it's a little easier. They get a 5 secondary. So the Kinugasa loses 1 of its 4 secondaries. But we're going to be able to move up now. So now we're on sequence 14, which is a 4, 3, or 1. So they're going to move up, and they're going to move up. Then the initiative player can move up. So they're going to move up, and they're going to move up. And now let's do a torpedo attack after the gunnery attack. Because this is going to be the last round I'm doing, and then we'll just wrap it up through 3 rounds. You'll have seen most of what the game has to offer here. Obviously, I'm just kind of like keeping it real basic. There's obviously strategies you can play where maybe you want to hit the ship, like up here, the ship that has, I think it's the, it's the Chokai with 7. You might want to attack that guy just because of all the armament he has. We're going to do our gunnery combat first. So again, we'll start up here with Kako. Now, Kako has 3 secondaries and no tertiaries left, and we're now in tertiary range. So I'm going to roll 3 and get no hits. Now I'm going to roll his tertiary, which he has none. So I'm not going to roll his tertiary. Furutaka still has all 4 of its secondaries. They get 1 hit. And let's roll this. A 4 is hull. So the Astoria takes a hull hit from the Furutaka. So the Astoria loses its second hull. And now let's roll the tertiaries for that ship. And they get an 8, which is secondary. Now here is an example where we won't actually have any damage because it can't damage this, because it's a tertiary, so that's nothing. And then we get to the Tenaru, which is nothing. And then finally the Yubari, which is also nothing. Now the Americans can fire back. We'll start with the Astoria, which has 4 guns in active condition. Oops, I used the wrong color, but we'll use the roll anyway. So they got 2 hits here. So we'll roll the first one. And I'm still rolling the wrong color. And that's a 3. And a 3 is torpedo mount. Now they do have a torpedo mount. So that will knock out their torpedo mount. So let's go to the Vincennes. Still has all 6. Look at that. 4 hits. And again, I keep rolling the Japanese dice. 4 hits on the Kako. This is probably going to sink it, to be honest. So a 9 is primary, which it doesn't have. So that's going to trickle down to the secondary. Then we'll roll again. And get another 9, so that's another secondary. And then we'll roll again. And get a 7, which is primary, which again becomes secondary. So now they're out of that, and we have 1 hit left to roll. And that's a 4, which is a hull hit. So they are down to 1 hull. Okay, so another rule that I haven't really been using that we need to kind of take into account here is the damage. So speed loss, the Kako actually, once a ship is at half hull, it loses 1 speed. So I've been kind of ignoring that, and I shouldn't have been. But their speed would actually be a 2+ now instead of a 3+, which would slow everybody down unless they were willing to leave that ship behind. All right, so that was the Vincennes, and now we'll go to the Quincy, which also has 6 guns. And they get 1 hit, which could be the end for the Kako here. Because with all of its guns knocked out, it's going to default to the hull anyway. And it's an 11, which is 2 hull, so, and also lose 1 speed, but that doesn't matter because that ship has now been sunk. So the Kako has been sunk. Now the helm can fire, and it's got 2 tertiaries, and it's going to fire at forward. Well, yeah, let's fire at the forward Taka. Why not? Doesn't matter, they're both misses. And our other destroyer, the Wilson, gets 1 hit. Now again, it's a tertiary, so we need to be cognizant of that fact. And they get a 7, and a 7 is primary, which will trickle to a secondary. So the Furitaka and the gun mounts, as you can see, are not armored. So they just lose 1. All right. So that is the end of that one. Now we'll do down here where they're literally adjacent to each other. Kinugasa currently has 3 secondaries available, so we will roll 3 dice. And they miss. Now we'll roll its secondaries. Actually, tertiaries rather, which it doesn't have either. They were both misses anyway. Now we'll do the Aoba, which has 4. 2 hits. 2 hits on the Chicago. So let's see what we get. A 3 is torpedo mount, which Chicago again does not have. And a 7, which is primary, which trickles down to secondary. But they do still have 4 because it doesn't take effect right away. Now we've got the Chokai with its 7. So again, we'll start with the 4. And they get 1 hit. We'll roll the other 3. And that was a 3. That's 1 hit. So they get 1 hit. And that 1 hit is a 6. And a 6 is tertiary. So that's going to knock out the Chicago's lone tertiary. It still gets to fire this turn, though. Now we do the Unigai, which only has 1. And look at that, it's a hit. But it is a tertiary, so let's see what it does here. A 4 on a tertiary hits the hull, but the hull is armored, so no damage. Can't be damaged by tertiaries. All right, so that takes care of the Japanese. Now the Chicago will fire. Now it lost 1 tertiary and 1 primary, so it has 4 primary. Let's use the blue dice. It gets no hits. And we'll do its 1 tertiary, which also is no hit. And then we know the Canberra has 5. It gets 2 hits. So 2 hits on the Kinugasa there with its secondaries. And a 7 is primary. So that becomes a secondary. And it gets 1 more roll. That is an 8. And an 8 is a secondary. So the Kinugasa is down to 1 gun left. Now we'll roll for the Canberra's lone tertiary. Nope. Okay. The Bagley gets to roll 2 tertiaries and gets a hit. And we'll roll again. And they get a 4. And a 4 is hull. And so that is also no damage. Now we'll roll for the other destroyer, which is the Patterson. And they also get a hit. They roll a 10, which is hull. And again, the hull will not take any damage from the tertiary. So that is the end of the gunnery combat. So now we'll do torpedo. During a torpedo impulse, ships with torpedoes may fire them at enemy ships that are sighted and are 0, 1, or 2 hexes away, exception for Japanese LL torpedoes, which is 304. The torpedo and gunnery impulses are resolved separately. Thus, a ship that had its torpedo mount destroyed by gunfire may not fire torpedoes. So unlike gunnery combat, that simultaneous torpedo combat happens after. And if you destroy the mount, they can't fire it. Now we know the Kako lost its mount, but the Kako was also sunk. So we don't have to worry about the Kako. Now the Furutaka here, put these back in a stack, is going to fire its long lance at the Astoria. So you can't fire torpedoes during storm or gale, which is not in effect. You do have to declare your target, which I did. Blocked fire, you can't fire through a hex that contains friendly ships. That makes sense. So you roll the number of dice equal to the firing ship's torpedo factor and apply any modifiers. So here are the modifiers. Okay, it's also on the regular tactical map. But the range is 0 or 1 hex, +1. Target's dead in the water would be a +1. Side has surprise sighting in the first round only, +1. So none of those apply. And just like gunnery, if it's a 6, it's a hit. So they miss. So now that would be the Furutaka. So I'm just going to put a slash through its torpedo because it's 6 rounds until they can fire until they get their reload and they can fire. And that's only for the long lance. So the Furutaka has fired. The Tenaru has 1 torpedo, which is, actually, no, yes, 1 long lance torpedo, also a miss. And the Yubari has 1 as well. So we'll just roll that down again. And that's a 5. So no hits from the torpedoes. But the Americans have 2 destroyers that also have torpedoes. And they are 2 hexes away. So there's no bonus for being adjacent. That'll happen down here. So they're going to fire at the Furutaka here. So we have 4 for the Helm and 4 for the Wilson. So 4 dice. No hits. And then 4 for the Wilson. 2 hits. Okay, so 2 hits. Now we have a torpedo damage table that we'll roll on. And we have 2 hits. And we got a 6. And a 6 is 2 hulls, 2 tertiaries. So torpedoes do big damage. So the Furutaka takes 2 hull hits and 2 tertiaries. So it loses both of its tertiaries, as well as taking 2 hull hits. Now that was the first one, and now we got to roll the second hit, and that is a 3, and a 3 is 1 hull. So just like that, they drop their speed down to a 2, like that, which I wasn't doing before, but I'm doing now. And that is the end of this this torpedo combat. Now we'll come down here. So we know that the Kinugasa, the AO, all of the Japanese ships have long lands, all of them. The Kinugasa has 3 torpedoes. Its mount has not been destroyed, so it does get to roll for them. And it gets a hit. Now we're still attacking the Chicago. So they get 1 hit, and I'm going to slice through the line there to indicate that. And we get a 12. And oh my goodness. The 12 for torpedo damage is 6 hulls, lose all speed. The Chicago's hull is only 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Chicago has been sunk. So that is the end of that. Which means that the Aoba will fire its 3 torpedoes at the Canberra. It gets a hit as well. And it gets, oh my goodness, a 12 as well. This is bad news. Now, the Canberra has 6 hull, but all 6 hull get destroyed. So the Japanese torpedoes are doing a number on these ships here. So we lost the Chicago and we lost the Canberra. Okay, which means that we're just down to 2 destroyers down here now. And we've got the chock, which has 4 torpedoes. Whoops. And it gets 2 hits, and they are just killing them with these torpedoes. They also get a +1, which I forgot about because they're adjacent. But yeah, an 8, which I'll apply the +1 to make it a 9, which is 4 hulls and a secondary. And on the Bagley, which is a destroyer, they only have 2 hull. So Bagley gets blown out of the water as well. Like so. Goodbye. And the last of our Japanese ships, oh, I forgot to mark off their fire here. So Aoba fired now, and it does not have the long lance, but that doesn't matter. They didn't hit anyway. So that is the end of that. And the Patterson, the lone American ship left, does have 4 torpedoes. It will fire at the Kinugasa, and it gets no hits. So that will end that. And I'm going to end the playthrough here. So a couple minor or a couple of extra points to make. So you see here, the ship has a name and a number. The number is how many victory points you get for sinking it. So the Americans sank the Kako and would get 27. The Japanese, however, sank a whole bunch of stuff. They get 29 for the Canberra, 28 for the Chicago, 11 for the Bagley, the Blue, and the Talbot. So that's 11, 22, 33, 61, 90 points. So, and we're not done, obviously. There's ships down here. This task force is still mostly intact and, you know, potentially dangerous. But the Japanese were eating them up in that torpedo round. So you can see torpedoes are an effective weapon. But I did want to kind of try and show as much as I could. And I did forget about the speed thing there and neglected to include that when there was enough damage. So there are some nuances that I probably missed and didn't catch while I was doing this. And, you know, as always, if you have comments to help clarify things, please post them. I would appreciate that. I always appreciate it when people help, you know, correct things so that other people who watch and look at comments will know that maybe I did something wrong and they get corrected. And, you know, the whole point of this is to show the game being played, but also hopefully to let people see how it is played so that when they go to play it, they get a more smooth transition. So, as always, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it. That will do it for this video. Please consider liking, sharing, and or subscribing if you would. That would be awesome. But even if not, I hope you enjoyed the video. So, I'm Joe. This has been Hexed Encountered, and until next time, happy gaming.